What's up, everybody? Welcome to a very special episode of the Action Network podcast. I am your host, Evan Abrams, and tonight I am joined by Action Network NFL expert Chris Raybon to not only recap round one of the draft, but we actually have some available markets up for round two. And maybe by the time we end this pod, there might be beyond that. But at the moment, we have a bet or two available. We'll be checking as this goes on. But Raybon, what can you say about round one? I need like a little bit of summary from you before we're just going to go into a few storylines, but off the top, what do you got?
Jaxon Dart, QB2,
Yes,
Shador Sanders. Where you at, brother? I don't know. I don't know where he's at. I think that's the thing that kind of stuck out the most to me, just because you and I have been kind of talking about this like potential Dart as the QB2 thing. I think since we've been doing these offseason pods, and also I will say, to my delight, my absolute delight, I think the Giants had, like, they didn't screw it up. Like, they actually had a good day one, which for most of the offseason just didn't look like it was going to happen. But I think it's really just a product of the demand for the quarterback market. It just all goes back to that. The fact that no one was really willing to trade up for, and no one was really willing to trade back until you got, toward the end of the draft. It just kind of turned the quarterback market on its head. And I think that's really the huge storyline. But Jaxon Dart, I've been saying, I thought he was the QB2 in his class. So I think the Giants came out about as well as they could have from this draft. And I will say the Travis Hunter, to Jacksonville, I think that was a really interesting one and I'm curious to see, how Cleveland makes the most of that trade, right? Because Mason Graham, great player. Understand if they weren't going to play Hunter at corner as much, maybe they felt like they didn't need to go with a wide receiver that high. But Shador Sanders now falls into the Browns' hands, right? At 33, and they got the 36. So they have like a lot of leverage, but what are you going to do with it? And if you're really not high in Shador, how are you going to kind of capitalize on these picks in a draft class where people think the second round is, and the first round was the weakest part, but at the same time, if you don't have a quarterback, what are we really doing here? So I'm very curious to see if the Browns, this is just going to be one of those things that's looked back on as like another just Browns colossal failure if Hunter turns out to be this like generational guy. But I also think this is probably the best case scenario for the Giants. So I'm interested to see how that plays out. But I'm also I think you hit on a lot of great long shots, I want to say, over this time. I know I was on Dart, but you had the Loveland. I think it was Banks to go in the top 10 back, but he was, nobody was talking about him. So really interested to hear what was your biggest takeaway from this draft?
I think, and me and our producer Matt Mitchell were talking about this before we came on air. And you nailed on this. Offensive lineman, defensive lineman ended up, I believe, both going over their over-unders, and it also ended up being that's what people end up kind of relying on. It ends up being like what you depend on late in drafts, I feel like. And I think that might be something I'll look at in later years. But I do feel like both of those totals, at least recently, tend to go over their over-unders late in drafts. And it did this year. I got bailed out with Campbell. Thank you, Howie, for coming in there. He ends up cashing my SEC over 14 and a half and both of my parlays
Nice.
coming in like one or two slots into that. Plus, I needed Hairston, so just a wild night. Some good stuff overall, but I think the overall, what you look at with this draft is early on, it was pretty chalky, right? Like what we had seen, right? Insane, yeah. Right? Like up to McMillan at 8, because McMillan at 8, he closed as the favorite in that slot, but leading up to it, it was Walker for weeks. So, I think 1 through 7, if you would have just listened a week or two ago, you probably would have nailed it. And then other than that, Carolina got a little funky and some things happened from there at 9. But aside from that, I think some of the mocks just, it was interesting to see Shador as well, right? Because they got it right. Like the intel later on, where it was like, it's either going to be Pittsburgh or it's going to be nothing. And it was nothing. And they nailed that pretty well because even Dable had loved Dart and he came and got his guy. It wasn't even like, we're going to figure out another way to acquire him. They traded up to get someone other than Shador, which,
Yeah,
you can
that
smile. But yeah,
that
it
that
says
is. I
something.
feel like that was the whole theme. We were on the favorites podcast earlier today, and I feel like that was kind of the whole theme of the show. Is that there's a lot of times where there's like it's just all media hype, but I felt like with Shador, it was like a clear indication that where teams kind of stood on him because just the simple fact that everybody in their right mind was trying to trade back in this draft. And pretty much at any spot in the first round, somebody could have traded up for Shador. Nobody did, like you said. And then the one trade you do see, early, like, or one of the first trades outside of, I think you had the Rams and Falcons make one, but the big one was the Giants getting back up there, and they go in a different direction, and that is something that we've been talking about really since the offseason started. Was I think Shador was the initial favorite, and as the process continued, it was no, this guy's not actually what we want. I was saying I don't think he's a great match for Pittsburgh, so I was not buying he was pretty much favored everywhere to go to Pittsburgh like in these last 48 hours. I don't think that made sense. And also we kind of we just talking about what if round 2 is just like what we thought round 1 was going to be for Cleveland. And it kind of is now because they can just draft Shador and they have 2 picks in the top 4 in the second round, and Shador might be there for both of them. So I think Shador Sanders and his slide is kind of the real story. And it's probably one of those things where it's, ESPN, all the media outlets, they were talking about Shador more than like anybody else. And of course he's the one guy that he doesn't get home in the first round.
Pour one out for anyone who took that Shador and Hunter to get drafted by the Browns because you really had it. Because it really seems like right now you have 2 picks, top 4 second round with him available. They just ended up trading it to Jacksonville. I think the only other storylines here, some of the closing odds. So Genty goes 6 to the Raiders. He closed it 9-1 to go 6. That's how backwards. We were basically telling you the entire time that the Raiders were interested. He was slated to go 6 in mocks. And then all of a sudden, everything changed, and he ended up closing it 9-1 to go at 6. So Pete Carroll gets him in Las Vegas. The other one,
and let me just say with Genty, another theme of the draft that we did spend some time talking about, and probably even more on this favorites pod this morning, was Kelvin Banks. Like, we loved him up until he got into that like 6-7 spot where it was like, okay,
nail that. We did kind of
wait a minute, and because of that. And like it was again, one or two singular mocks have way too much influence, I think. And what ended up happening was everyone kind of talked themselves into Genty already being off the board with the Jaguars pick, and then at 5, which turned out to be they traded up.
Mason Graham again.
But yeah, and then everyone wanted to fade Mason Graham, which was crazy because he's just a great prospect. But then because of the Banks rise, I really think is what threw the Genty market off too, because the Raiders, Genty not falling past 6 always made too much sense. Like, you could have seen the Patriots even taking him at 4. You could have seen whoever's at 5 taking him. You could have seen a team trade up, whatever. But he was there at 6. It just didn't really make sense for the Raiders to pass on him, just given the lack of talent in this class. And I mean, Banks was a guy who was, a few weeks ago, he was, first of all, people were talking about using him at guard, and then he flies up a few mocks, and we were talking about him when he was a good long shot value, and and then all of a sudden today, the market just went a little bit over, and I think that was another way where you could have just really cleaned up, just kind of going back to that chalk order, which was with Shador out of the picture. And Another thing I want to mention is the benefit of kind of betting the draft throughout the offseason, because you and I have been kind of talking most weeks. It's almost every week we've gotten together on this pod and talked about, and we were talking about Jaxon Dart 8+850 in late March to be the second quarterback. Abdul Carter at number 3 at +340 in early April, and then Campbell at +450 to be the number 4 pick in early April. Chicago to draft a tight end first, things like that. Oh, at 7-1. Like, these were all bets that we were making as the draft progressed. And maybe they didn't close like that. Maybe things got crazy in the end. But I think there was a real big benefit. And some of the biggest bets I hit actually were just those bets in like early to mid-April, where we were just kind of fading the consensus at that time and taking like the second most logical outcome. And I think those just kind of cleaned up with that chalk, with the order being for the top 6. You could even say 7, because Membu was kind of mocked to the Jets before all this Banks type too. I think that was really a valuable way to approach the draft. So that's just kind of a note for everybody that maybe just kind of tried to get all their bets in like, a few hours before. It's really beneficial to kind of, if you're interested in investing in the draft, to play some of those odds earlier on, because nobody really knows anything.
Yeah, I feel like I've said it a bunch of times, but it's like, if you're going to gamble on the draft and you're going to do it, there's a few different ways to attack it. You just have to make sure you watch out for your bets depending on when you do it, right? Like, if you're going to do it every day, if you're going to do it a week or two out, or if you're just going to do it day of, I think there's just a bit of a different strategy. Like, McMillan top 10 ended up being a very lucrative thing, but it was very different odds depending on when you took it. The other one we were talking about was Loveland, which ends up going first tight end. And I even screwed up. That was a one bet I tracked and lost today, because I was like, at this point, I feel like Warren's the right move, and it ends up being exactly what I thought initially. So
yeah,
it's some of these things, very, very confusing. But I mean,
but I gotta give you credit for the Loveland thing, because it was actually surprising to me that he went. I did hear that Chicago specifically had him higher, and that's why I liked I made the bet on Chicago to take first tight end. That was fine, but I really didn't hear anything else about Loveland specifically over Warren. But I think in retrospect, looking back on it, I think the Jets were a real kind of the Jets and the Saints were two teams where everyone kind of didn't know what they were going to do, and then Carolina not trading out. It kind of just, everyone kind of settled on these outcomes based on these other outcomes, and once those didn't happen, it just threw everything off. So I definitely got that wrong, and you were on that. So I got to give you a lot of credit for that Loveland call.
I mean, even think about this. So Loveland closed 10-1 to go 10th, and he also closed 6-1 to be the first tight end. So markets did not think this was going to happen. I think the only other two things I'd probably say from the draft before we go into some bets: Tyler Booker at 12 felt like a crazy stretch. I mean, he was mocked 28th. He was mocked very, very high in a lot of different places. And if you look, because I had some of the closing odds here, he ends up closing at 25.5 for his over-under and goes 12th to the Cowboys. Listen, I get the need. I just feel like, again, it's a bit of a reach. Any thought there on Booker?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be interesting because only the teams truly know the answers to this. We can kind of speculate, but I'd be interested to know which teams kind of were forced to kind of pivot based on the fact that the board just didn't unfold the way they thought it would, right? Because I do think that it's clear Dallas was going best player available to some extent, or at least it wasn't, I don't know if it was solely based on need, because it wasn't
golden, right?
That's what I'm saying. It was like, because you would argue that, well, you also had a need at wide receiver, you had a need running back. We figured they would probably go a little bit later, but you had Golden on the boards and Ibuka, who ended up going higher than we thought. So you passed on those guys, and you passed on Hampton. You passed on, Henderson wasn't going to go that high, but there were other needs that were considered bigger for Dallas. And so maybe that's just where they had the board. But I do think that the Panthers, because the Panthers were offering teams a discount to trade out of 8. So I don't know if anybody else, I don't even know if Dallas goes McMillan there, is what I'm getting at 12. I don't know. I would love to know what would have happened if McMillan was there at 12 and it was just Dallas teams being a little lower on Golden, which is another one. I thought Golden would be a little more tempting to teams with the speed. He ends up being the third wide receiver going behind Ibuka, which I mean that's kind of makes sense why Ibuka would go higher. But that was just something we weren't seeing mock. But I would just wonder if Carolina threw everybody off, because Carolina not trading out and then taking McMillan there, maybe Dallas wanted him at 12, and then they just kind of had to pivot, and they only had a few minutes to kind of figure out. But maybe that was just Dallas's board, because they've been known to go best player available, and they clearly passed on other pretty highly rated prospects at other positions of need. So that's kind of a question that we probably we won't know the answer to, especially considering Jerry Jones would have to tell us. But I'd be curious to know that, and just for some of those other picks in that middle of the round, like, was that the intent for these teams? Like, Tampa Bay going with a wide receiver and then Denver going with Jahdae Barron. Was that always the plan? Or because we heard Denver wanted to trade up for running back, a wide receiver, a tight end, and then they go corner. Whereas Tampa Bay, I mean, you already have Evans, Godwin, McMillan, and you go Ibuka over Golden. So it's like it seems like Tampa Bay wanted to go wide receiver, but I just wonder, then for Denver, was Ibuka the plan there for Denver, because they passed on Golden? There's just a lot of questions in that middle round of who had to kind of pivot and who just had the board drastically different from I guess what you would say the consensus was.
One thing I'll say is, so Tampa Bay was going to take Ibuka the entire time, because I don't think anyone else was going to jump ahead of him. Like, that was probably the earliest most of us would have assumed he was going to go. So that was, we talked about this being a very preference draft. Well, Tampa Bay preferred Ibuka because they took him at 19. And then you talk about Denver. I mean, Hampton was there. If they, everyone and their mother had mocked Hampton to Denver, assuming that was, and if not, then they were going to go wide receiver, right? Like, we had heard that as well.
And Golden was there.
Yeah, and Golden was there. Well, I mean, listen, they closed at 34-1 to take a cornerback. Like, that was literally something no one had assumed, based on the fact that it was really not a, complete need. But Will Johnson doesn't go.
Yeah.
We talk Mike Green as well, be all based off of some sort of, injury history. Well, we end up seeing Barron go first in terms of the DBs because of that. And honestly goes to Denver, which, in a division where you got Mahomes and Herbert and, all that type of stuff, and you're trying to stop quarterbacks, it's not terrible.
I think Denver made a really smart move. I want to say that because I know how tempting it must have been. Sean Payton is the leader of that team. He's known as an offensive guy. They hit on their quarterback, but it still feels like they're probably a playmaker away, especially at running back. They had the choice of Hampton. They had the choice of Golden, who, a lot of people had as the number one receiver on the board. And they go with Barron, who I think is a very talented player in his own right. And in a draft where I think there was a bigger drop off than maybe people thought, because of just how much Will Johnson has slid. In retrospect, if teams weren't that high in Will Johnson, we have heard, I thought the hype was getting too much. I actually bet Johnson to go under 24.5. So, but you got to take some shots like that too. But listen, if no one has a first round grade on Will Johnson, and Barron was the clear guy then, and he can play inside, he can play, and for Denver to do that, I think their defense, like you said, yes, they have to get playmakers, but there's gonna be playmakers in this draft, and they've proven that they can kind of hit on guys in the middle rounds in terms of offense. I think Denver really made a smart move there and didn't get kind of carried away. And whereas you saw, listen, you had the other two of the other teams in their division, right? You just mentioned you got to play Mahomes, right? Well, the Raiders go running back, and the Chargers go running back. You know what I mean? It's like, so I want to give shouts. I got to give a shout out to Denver for that, because I just that kind of stands out to me, where it's something it may never play out directly as if, like, Denver's going up against Kansas City in week 18 and when LA played them in week 17, and like, but I think it definitely could be a deciding factor in a division race, or at least a race for maybe the spot behind the Chiefs that could be very tight. I think Denver choosing to go with a corner, whereas the other two division rivals go running back with the first pick in a deep running back draft in a division with Mahomes. That could be looked at as a clear win for Denver, and just a clear fail for those other two teams. Even though, I mean, I thought Jency deserved to go where he went, but the Chargers a little bit head scratching. I thought they could have afforded to wait on running back.
I mean, yeah, but a lot of people loved Hampton. I mean, his catching ability. There were some certain things, and Harbaugh loves his running back. So to see someone like that at the draft, I could understand it. The only other thing I'll mention is this: James Palmer, who's reporter NFL, kind of reported on the fact that the Broncos didn't even believe that Barron would be available at that point. So I guess, I mean, you could say that they were interested in Hampton, and then all of a sudden, this other guy who they didn't think would be there kind of falls there. So again, you were talking about changing plans. It's definitely possible. All right. The only other things I would talk about in terms of the first round, at least from my point. So Jalen Walker falls to 15th in Atlanta. We have been talking, maybe Shamar Stewart in that spot, but Walker, who was almost minus 1,000 basically at close to go top 10, ends up falling to 15th. I think that's at least something intriguing based off the odds, something that we didn't see happening. And other than that, I find it funny that Philly trades up one spot to take Jahad Campbell, obviously a Howie guy, but that's gotta make somebody pay for that in the future, because that's kind of what the Eagles do. But any final thoughts there before we talk about some bets?
Yeah, I think I just want to. I think if you're Houston, if you're the teams that kind of traded back in this first round, I just, it's just a tough spot to be in, because I think this class, the first round was obviously lacking, and so it makes sense to kind of trade back a little bit, but it also just might be not a deep class period, and I just wonder, like, Houston still hasn't gotten better. I thought Philly finds a way to get like a top player out of position once again. So like, remember how Houston was being talked of as like this, contender heading in, and I just feel like they've been kind of on this downward spiral. And then same like the Chargers, they make the playoffs last year, but they weren't even on Houston's level, and then they go running back first. So I just think this first round, and obviously you got 6 more to go and things can change, but I just wonder how long term, like, I don't know if anyone closed the gap on like Mahomes and Josh Allen and then the Bengals go with Stewart, who he was very, very controversial kind of guy given the production. So it's almost like the rich either stayed rich or got richer, but it doesn't really look like anyone on that back end.
Well, what do you think? What do you think about Packers and Golden? I guess that would be the only thing. Like, I mean, adding a piece like that. I mean, we were talking about him going earlier. Green Bay was right on the edge of getting there. They obviously add another wide receiver to a group of Dobbs and Watson, and I mean, also they now have a wealth of different options for Jordan Love. But what do you think about that? I mean, that feels like something that I mean, he's a fast guy like Worthy, right? Like, I mean, he can take them kind of over the edge.
I mean, as much as I like Golden as a prospect, and I do think he was being a little underrated, underdrafted, I should say. I just don't know if they were a wide receiver away. I thought they're like wide receiver wasn't really the problem. Yes, everyone got hurt in one game at the end, and that could happen regardless of who the guys are. But it just kind of stuck out to me that no one seemed to close the gap on those elite teams. Like the Lions go and they get another, they beef up their D line. And the Ravens get what? The top safety in the class falls to them. The rich
I
get
love
richer.
Starks.
Right. So it's like the Ravens, the Lions, the Eagles, the Chiefs came out of this fine, but it just doesn't seem like the Bengals closed the gap. Doesn't seem like the Chargers closed the gap. Doesn't seem like the Texans closed the gap. And I know we got a long way to go. But again, we're just reacting to round one. Those are just kind of my thought. Packers, even, it's just that is kind of my thought, my big takeaway kind of looking at this. It's just that no one really closed the gap on those teams that we think are going to be at the top, and teams that, I think the Giants played it about as well as they could. And for Jacksonville, I do like, going after who could be one of only, a few truly difference making players in this entire draft class. But even that, it's a little bit of, a kind of question mark of how do they maximize him, and do they have enough to maximize him around, on defense and things like that, and kind of giving up some picks in what would be the meat of the draft. So yeah, I just think that's the storyline for me, at least after round one, is that a lot of the rich either not only got richer, but no one really closed the gap in my eyes either.
Raybon always ruining a storyline. I believe they drafted drafting a wide receiver for the first time since like Javon Walker in 2002.
I like Gold.
Right.
I'm just saying. But you're right. Receiver away.
But you're right. If you looked at the roster last year, they all got hurt in one game, and it wasn't like it was a need. They're all like 23 years old. Yeah. So it's like you're adding another guy to the room doesn't completely make sense. All right, let's go to some bets. There aren't a ton on the board right now. We have one based on just the fact that it's who will get taken at the 33rd slot. So we're going to start there, and then there's like some awards up. So we'll go to that in a second, but 33 is currently owned by Cleveland. I think when we're talking about 33, we have to mention they also have 36. So you probably need to try to map out what you think Cleveland A needs and B would take in either of those slots they'd be worried about someone else taking. So I think anyone would probably land on Shedeur. So I believe Shedeur, when this market opened, was about minus 105 area. He got up to about minus 160, 165. He's now sitting just after midnight Eastern on 24th to 25th of April, minus 150 to go at that 33rd slot. You pretty much have every player listed here, from Milroe to Henderson to Mike Green, to Burden, all Will Johnson sitting here at 25 to 1. He was 50 to 1. So with just one market up in terms of exact pick, any thought here, Cleveland 33?
Yeah. So I think you have to face, Shedeur is probably the most likely guy. Just if you don't want to take that risk and, he's falling into your lap, you already kind of won by, I guess you didn't want Hunter. You traded back, got more picks, and Shedeur falls into your lap. So you control that top of the draft. But what I do think from a betting perspective, and more markets will start to pop up where you can kind of attack this in different ways. But 33 and 36 are Cleveland's. The two teams in between them as of now are the Titans and the Texans, or the Texans and the Titans. Both of those teams don't need a quarterback. Now, you could say, well, okay, you got to take Shedeur because you're worried that somebody trades up into those two spots. But number one, it's trades that haven't exactly come easy in this draft. Number two, the teams currently there don't need a quarterback. Number three, we don't even know if Shedeur is the QB3 on their board. Or if he's the top quarterback on their board, or for that matter, I'll just throw this out there. We don't know if he's the best quarterback on anybody's board that needs a quarterback right now, right? We heard New Orleans like Jaxon Dart more than Shedeur. We don't know if they might like Shuck Milroe, because Milroe's the second favorite. We should probably point that out for pick 33. And it's like plus 650, but he's still the second favorite.
I mean, what about Shuck? Shuck's 11 to 1. I mean, there's preferences here. Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. So that's what I'm getting at. It's if you don't really have, if it's just a tier where it's Shador, it's Milroe, it's Shuck, and it very well might be for all of these quarterback needy teams, which is why you saw what happened in round one unfold the way it did, then I don't think Cleveland goes Shador at 33 because number one, there's a very decent possibility he's there at 36. Number two, they might not care whether they get him or, the next guy on their board. They might have him rated equally or even somebody better. So I think the way to play this market and the way to kind of attack this is just take some shots here on some long shots. So, okay, Cleveland clearly didn't feel like they needed, to go with Hunter early. People thought they didn't need a corner. So they could even trade out of this pick because this is number 33. It's not, Cleveland doesn't have to make it for this bet to hit. So I wonder if, somebody says, hey, let's end the Will Johnson side. He's 25-1. He was the guy that is even in with the slide. He was still kind of looked at as like a top half first round pick, maybe top 20 guys. So he's 25-1. I think the Browns, maybe they feel like they're going to go with a receiver here, and you still have Luther Burden at 25-1. I think even a guy like Travion Henderson, this might be a spot where they feel like, with the two teams behind them having quarterbacks already, maybe somebody, jumps on him and maybe there's a drop off after him. You feel like, so I think there's viewed as a drop off after a wide receiver. There's viewed as a drop off after a corner, and they're viewed as a little bit of a drop off after running back. So those are the guys I would look at. But I think Shuck at 11-1 is also interesting because we've heard the whispers that some teams have him as their QB2. That may very well be true for Cleveland. And if they think somebody else also does, he might be what we think Shador is. So that's how I would kind of play this early part of the draft, is kind of looking at some of these guys who slid and kind of just same thing we kind of did in round one, just kind of pivoting away from the Shador most likely outcome, because I think that opens everything up.
So I think Henderson, aside from Shador, which I think we're all assuming probably makes the most sense here. If you're trying to be a little contrarian, I think Henderson makes sense in terms of a potential need for Cleveland, in terms of the player, the talent, been talked about in round one. To try to sit here and say, like, would it be another running back? I think is probably wasting your money when you're talking about like Scatabo and Junkins. Like, I just don't think we're there yet. So it's Henderson. He's like 10-1 right now. So I think that pick is fine. If you want to go far down the board, a need is also offensive line, offensive tackle. Erzuri right now is probably the best available. Ariante Erzi
Is 75-1.
75-1. So I think if you're just assuming that they could potentially get him a few slots later, and I could, butcher his name one more time, I think it's 75-1. He would have a dart throw from me in just on needs, right? Like, best available. Everyone assumes they go one direction. I think it's worth talking about. I literally just saw his odds move, but Mason Taylor was talked about, and I guess from a positional standpoint, maybe it doesn't make the most sense, but he was talked about like 30, 31, 32, even before today. So something like that at like 42-1 feels like an interesting pick as well.
Yeah, I think you're on to something with tackle, because you did see kind of the run on tackles. Connerly was a guy that, he at first he wasn't being mocked as much into the first round, and he ends up going in, and then you had, even at offensive line period, you had the interior guys going sooner than we thought. Like, we had Zabel and Booker going top 18, which a lot of people had them going kind of back half of the draft. So I think Cleveland, if they really aren't sold on these quarterbacks and they keep the pick, and we assume that, like, there haven't been any trades made yet, then I think Houston it would also be a threat. Who's traded with the Giants. Houston would be a threat for offensive tackle as well, and that's why Houston probably felt comfortable trading back there. All right, because there's also a drop off between Ursary and the next tackle who could it be Wyatt Millam out of West Virginia? Could it be
Charles Grant, maybe?
Yeah. So there is probably a drop off there. So I just wonder if Cleveland ends up doing that, because like I said, it just at this point the markets are assuming not only is Cleveland like dead set on a quarterback, but that they have, but they're also assuming the exact order that they have, which is, essentially Shador way over Milrow and Shuck, which may just not be true for them or anyone else. So I think that's a bit that I think you're onto something with tackle and Ariante. I think it's Erseri, but I'm not the pronouncer of names.
If you think I'm going to try that again, you have another thing coming.
But the point is he's 75-1. That is something I'm betting right now.
Definitely. The only other markets up right now, there are some specials for Travis Hunter, just because FanDuel's so nice to kind of have that market up, which, it kind of is what it is. There's some long stuff here. I guess the only one that's kind of interesting is the fact that, like, is he going to play both sides of the ball? They have some, regular season receiving yards, things of that nature. I don't think we need to talk about that. I don't want, need them holding my money at the moment. The only other thing is offensive rookie of the year, defensive rookie of the year. They just have some fun odds up. Is there any player? I mean, I know you're going to be like deep into best ball in a little while when we talk about that, but is there any player you'd be looking at either of those odds potentially for a long shot?
Let's see. So right now we have Cam Ward is the favorite. We'll start with offense. We have Cam Ward is the favorite. He's plus 330, and then Ashton Genty is plus 340. So first of all, I'll just say this. I think if those two guys, if you're going to assume those two guys are the favorites as of now, it makes sense. Quarterback, and then the top. Like, well, I mean, I guess he wasn't even the top. Now he's just, if you're counting Hunter as a wide receiver, he's the second top non-quarterback. But I think Genty should be higher than Cam Ward. I think Cam Ward could be decent, but I don't think he's going to have the numbers at the end of the year that like Genty will have on the Raiders, where he's going to get probably as many touches as he can handle, and he's just going to kind of be that offense, I think. And you do have a decent quarterback now, at least, so it won't be like a complete game script disaster, you don't think. So I think those odds are way off. I think Genty, I know it's, a little harder probably for running backs over quarterbacks, but I just think Genty should be significantly ahead of Cam Ward right now. So that's how I would kind of attack that. And then Hunter 6-1, I think just this prospect of him playing some type of role on defense does worry me a little bit, but I can see those odds coming down as well. But I would look at that split between Genty and Ward right now. This might be the worst odds Genty is, because this is, again, not a standout quarterback class. So you do want to fade quarterback, and it's just, if Genty gets the work that he's going to get being the number 6 overall pick, it's going to be hard for one of these wide receivers to beat him. It's going to be hard for Omari and Hampton being in more of a probable committee. So I think Genty should be more of a clear favorite, and I think he should be well ahead of Ward. So that's what I would do right now. That's what I'm going to sprinkle a little bit on that, because I think Genty's odds are the most likely to get shorter. Cam Ward's odds probably the most likely to get longer, at least in the offseason. So I think you'll get a better opportunity to bet on Cam Ward if you do like him. You could very well win it, and running backs get injured more, but I think Genty is the bet to make right now.
Yeah, on offense, I think things are just crowded. So McMillan's a little bit crowded, Hampton's crowded, Golden's crowded, Dart's competing, Abuka's crowded. Like, they kind of all got drafted to places that aren't going to allow them to do everything. So I think that's one on offense, so I think Genty's probably the obvious one right now that'll get a little bit shorter. I'm also kind of disappointed in the sports books because I went to just go parlay Travis Hunter to win both awards, offense and defense, and it won't let me do it. So I just want to say that they should probably allow me to do that just for fun, and I would happily put $1 on it. On defense, do you have any other thoughts?
So the favorite right now is Abdul Carter at plus 240. Now on defense, I think it tends to be more wide open
Yeah.
because it's going to come down to, sacks, which are a little bit of a variance that you could get a lot of pressures and you just don't end up getting the sack. Especially, well, I'll say this. We should be fading Carter right now because yes, he was a top defensive player or true defensive player taken. However, you got to think about how is he going to fill up the stat sheet, and it would be sacks, right? Well, you're going to be on a defensive front with Burns and, I mean, not that Thibodeau is, ever lived up to his hype, but you're just going to be on a crowded defensive line where, to your point about some of the offensive guys, Abdul Carter could be getting a ton of pressures and not necessarily have the sack numbers to, to show for it. So I think you definitely want to be fading him. It sounds like Travis Hunter is going to be used more on offense. So he's 10-1. I think that's going to be tempting for a lot of people, but I'm not going to touch that because I just don't know if he gets enough snaps here, and then he still has to, win it. So I think the guys I would look at are, Mason Graham, plus 750, and I think Barron at 27-1.
Oh wow.
Yeah, guys like that. Those are the guys where I'd look early. And then even, a guy like Starks, 23-1, Jahad Campbell, 20-1. Those guys are going to be in a situation where, the defenses around them are already strong. So they could really stand out just based on kind of the schemes and the strength of the players around them. So if they themselves kind of put up numbers and it's like a meh, class or just guys don't put up the numbers we think on top of them, I think those guys are in great position. So, and they're going to be on teams that will probably be at the forefront, probably have some of the best records in the league. So yeah, I would look at Campbell at 20-1, Starks at 23-1, Barron 27-1. Those would be the guys that really stand out to me.
Yeah, it's just a little crowded, right? So Jalen Walker gets drafted with Pierce to Atlanta. Walker's the second choice. Graham's going to be potentially with Hendrickson. So does that help? Does that hurt? And the same thing with Jamar Stewart. I'm sorry. Graham's going to be with Garrett, and Stewart's going to be with Hendrickson. So I feel like on some level it could help them just get a lot more single coverage and maybe rack up the pressures and the sacks. Defense is always a little bit tough for me, so I will rely on you there. But I would probably say that a Howie guy with Campbell is interesting, but can linebacker, I mean, unless he gets like a ton of pressures and the stats rack up, you'd probably want to lean on DL and edge.
Yeah.
I think that would probably win the award more. I think Mason Graham's probably a decent bet.
He's been just
on that defense.
Right?
Yeah.
Don't you think he's just like, people are kind of overlooking him? I don't know, I guess it's just because everyone's kind of focused on other things, but I just feel like he's potentially, especially if, let's say, Abdul Carter kind of has some injury issues or whatever,
which is possible.
Mason Graham is probably, if Carter's out of the equation, which we're, for this exercise, he's plus 240, Graham's plus 750. So we're just putting him out of the equation anyway, just because I think those odds are way too short. Mason Graham could be like far and away the best defensive player in this class. And I think for him, he's where he's going to line up. It actually is a little bit more beneficial to have a guy like Garrett who could, to get pressures, because then Graham could actually rack up the sacks, because, usually you're talking about the guys wind up inside, they're not going to get as much production. So I think Graham is a smart choice among like the true blue chip guys. And like you said, I got a Howie guy at linebacker, even, I just think that Eagles defense got a lot of hype this year. I mean, you look at, we were talking about Hooper DeJean and Quinion Mitchell. So he's definitely going to get, and we saw how, it was a big talking point when who was it? N'Kobe Dean went down. So I think
Yeah.
Campbell might get enough, and he's in a position where they could use him in different ways, where he could get maybe he just gets a bunch of turnovers, that others kind of create, but he's just all over the. So I do see it, and then. Again, I think maybe even something like a guy like Starks in Baltimore, but Barron, I think 27-1 in Denver. You're gonna have you're gonna get tested, I think, because you have an elite corner on one spot for Denver already, so you're gonna get tested as a rookie, just like the rookie Riley Moss got tested last year. So Barron is another guy who's going to have a ton of opportunity, and he's the top corner in this class. So I think he's a smart bet at 27-1.
As soon as everyone saw Philly trade up and then they took Campbell, everyone was like, no, they can't keep getting away from this. Can't keep getting away with this. So Philly just keeps doing the same stuff. So I'll probably look at Campbell as well. Right now, that is all the markets that we see available for the second round and beyond. There will definitely be more that start popping up. So check that out. But that is it for me and Chris Raybon on the Action Network podcast. We appreciate everybody listening. Hope everybody enjoyed round one and all the chaos that had to do from Green Bay. Definitely check out the rest of the rounds, and we will have a bunch of content on actionnetwork.com, and we will be back. We will talk, AFC, NFC, needs, the fantasy flex guys will be around, but tune in, and we will see you guys soon. Thanks for tuning in, and see you later.